And we also have with us Peter Palmer, who is a retired Army general with operational, educational, and extensive training expertise. He helped develop the Army's human dimension concept and capabilities, which is a framework for optimizing human performance. He ran General Dynamics Edge Innovation Network, and he is the vice chair of National Defense Industrial Association Human Systems Division.
I'm going to start off and just give you a little bit background, and the topic's human dimension, but also the purpose for this conference, of course, is cultures. And, sort of building on what we heard today about CEOs set the culture for the companies. Understand the CEO for the military is the president, okay? And whether we're a rather large organization. There might be some bureaucracies involved, and Congress likes to play. By the way, I call all of them tribes, not to be derogatory. It's just to highlight they all have different cultures, they all have different leadership, they all have different processes. And if you don't appreciate those cultural differences, I'll just simplify as cultures, but it's more than culture, then they have their own languages. How do you interface? And especially with this broad spectrum, and understand we do this in nations all over the world. So we're not only talking U.S. cultures, we're talking cultures and engagements. And then maybe the more educated ones, we can do that, but our privates have to be that good because they're the ones out on the front actually doing a lot of these things. So as we looked at this piece, and by the way, as we talk cultural change, the military, there's one advantage with the CEO and the military is when they say do culture change, they just tell you and you do it. It's, as we start, when we integrated the races under Truman back then, that, by the way, the military is, from all of society. They all come with their own cultures, their own biases, their own beliefs, and we have to shape them into, the military cultures and ethics and selfless service and everything else. And selfless service is not necessarily everybody's standard mode. So we bring them in, and when they say change culture, whatever the rules are, we are dictated by laws and we are dictated by Congress and the Constitution. So it's not just the CEO can go do something, there's all checks and balances. So, but in the same vein is when they tell us to do it, we may not immediately change their beliefs, but we can dictate their behavior. And of course the environment these kids are in, when you're in a foxhole getting shot at, you don't care who, where they're from, that trust build quickly develops. And for those that are in the neuroscience, you get the oxytocin surge, and that's good. Okay, so bottom line is after the current conflicts we've been having for 10 years, a four-star of mine that was running our training and doctrine command asked me to join them. And I got brought into what is the governmental bureaucracy of how we build capabilities. And I walk in, I'm an operator, I've been in the field, and I go, well, no wonder we don't get anything done. Look at all this stuff. And he says, yeah, well, we've got to do that. But more importantly is, everybody gets fancied or gets enamored with bright, shiny objects. The new iPhones, and, in the military, the new satellites or something else. But what, especially for the Army, and the Marines, it's more about the human. And what we were figuring out is we have concepts for everything, but we don't have a concept about a human. And how do we expect, how we're going to grow the Army? What do we want the Army to be? All the stuff we're talking about here. What's the future of my company's culture? What's the future? How do I go get the right people? Because understand, our recruiting, I don't know if you understand this, but in the volunteer Army, we recruit from the top 23% of our nation, which means all the others don't qualify. They're either, physically not set, they're morally, they got arrested for something, or third, they don't have the academic capabilities to do that. The ones that qualify are basically college level. That's where most of our recruiting occurs, in college, because some kids just don't feel like doing college right now. So that's where we get our pool. So we got top kids coming in, and they're questioning and they're smart and everything else, but we're also throwing them into environments they're not used to. And that became a concern. So our job was, okay, human dimension concept, we broke it into 3 parts. The physical, the cognitive, and the social moral, which in retrospect, I now call belief systems, okay? The physical part, we're actually pretty good at that. We know how to measure how tall you are, how big your feet are, what size gloves you want. Where we struggled with is how do I measure their cognitive capabilities and what are the metrics I use there? And then we get into belief systems. Well, as the neuroscience has educated me, belief systems occur in the brain too. That's where it happens. I kind of, my personal bias is I like to see how things work so that I understand to make it better. So if I need to understand how somebody thinks or feels, how do I shape that piece and what causes them to shape? Is it a neurochemical? How do I trigger the neurochemical? Is it this? How do I trigger memories so that it gets pulled back together? So I actually got sent on we stood up a whole science and technology community with all the researchers. Steve was one of them. He was as part of a university-affiliated research center that we did. And as we got into the brain and the cognitive piece, we also got into things like post-traumatic stress. By the way, there's post-traumatic growth, too. I mean, you don't hear about the positive side, but you get both. You get TBI or concussions, and we get into that aspects. And I sat in the Pentagon for 3 hours with a DARPA neuroscience, and she's educating me for the first time on neuroscience and how the brain evolved and everything else. And I was just sitting there, like my mouth on the table going, look, I've been in the military for 30 years. I do training education, and I don't even know how it works. And she's explaining that, if you're under 30-ish, okay, your frontal lobes for critical decision-making may not be developed yet. And I'm going, wait a minute, you just told me every squad leader, platoon leader, company commander that I send into very hard positions may not have grown up yet. If I haven't trained them, I'm expecting them to go into very difficult situations, make critical life and death situations, and the kids have not grown up yet. Okay. Now, by the way, if you train them and you build that neural network that they can do, but then the other part they don't. So that's a problem, but it also goes to the leadership piece because they're all working off of emotions. They aren't working off of, by the way, emotions are key to every decision. But the key is they don't have any balancing act to go do that, and that becomes a critical piece. So the next step, of course, is, okay, now how do we go do this? And this is where we figured out we needed the baseline, we need to do, and by the way, when you, even in the military, when you start talking about getting in somebody's head, all of a sudden the ethicists come out and everybody else is going, you're trying to brainwash them, and I'm going, well, we actually do that anyway, we just don't know it, okay? You go to school, you're going to get a neural network build. If you get an experience, you're going to get it. Now, is it what you want? Is it what you're trying to shape? So, it's got to that level. So you got to be worried about ethics. Are we going to plant chips in the guy's or gal's skull? Probably not. I mean, why would you do that? But what I will tell you, what I've come across and what Steve and I are working is, what I really want to do is, how do I enhance somebody's potential? And what is their baseline potential? What do we need to improve? What can't we improve? And I go, if you're 7 feet tall, okay, you're not 5 foot tall, you're 7 feet tall. If you're 5 foot tall, you're not 7 foot tall, and I mean, you can stretch all you want, but you're not going to be 7 feet tall. Same thing, it goes in the cognitive domains, okay? Neuroplasticity allows you to change that to some degree, but your gene pool does dictate some of it, but the environment dictates it too, and that would get into the epigenetic side of the world of how the environment will shape your gene responses. So we get into, let's call it higher level biological math, but it really breaks down to simple is we can train and educate, but we got to know what we start with. And I'll cover that a little bit more in the questions and answers, but I'm going to turn it over to Steve so he can cover his part.